Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. In this video, I want to look at the week starting on Monday, April the 22nd, 2024. This is a week that runs through until Sunday, April the 28th, 2024. So I'm going to start by giving an overview of what is going to be in this video. So I'm going to start this video by looking at the main events this week. What I see as being the important things going on that we should look out for, that are going to influence what happens to us and what happens to the world. And as far as I'm concerned, the main event is a full moon, which is on Tuesday. I think that's Tuesday the 23rd. And I'm going to look at this full moon in detail. And that means I'm going to set up an astrocartography for the full moon, and I'm going to consider how this full moon might impact a few famous people. I'm also actually going to talk about my own chart, because I think this full moon might have an impact on me. I'm slightly concerned about it because it's not a nice full moon in some respects, because it's Scorpio. The Scorpio full moons, I don't know, I find these Scorpio full moons, which we have every year in April, May, I often find them to be quite difficult. This full moon in particular is for Scorpio. It's a pretty unpleasant degree. I mean, the moon has its point of fall at 3 degrees Scorpio, so it's not far off. So I'm going to explore some of my own personal concerns. I know that might seem a bit self-indulgent, but maybe, maybe I suppose talking about my own chart is I'm giving myself a taste of my own medicine, perhaps. I go on talking about other people's charts and what bad things that might happen to other people. Well, maybe I should consider my own chart and what I am worried about. And having looked at the astrology of the week, I'm going to turn to the I Ching, and I'm going to do an I Ching reading for the week. And as I always remind you, you don't have to watch it. This I Ching reading is only for people who actually watch the reading, who watch the section of the video relating to I Ching. So if you decide you don't want your I Ching to be read, just don't watch that particular section of a video, because then it's not part of you. So that's the structure of this video. And I should say that the I Ching is separated into 4 sections, and the 4 sections are going to be a general reading, a section relating to money, then career, and then to relationships. Okay, so let's look at what is going on astrologically this week. So this chart is the beginning of the week, set for midnight on Monday, when the week starts. I've set it for New York. It doesn't make any difference. It doesn't have to be set in New York. It just gives us an idea of the starting positions. So the beginning of a week, New York time, we notice that the moon is at 12 degrees 18 Libra. Now, that means that it is about to enter the Via Combusta. The Via Combusta is that part of the sky between 15 Libra and 15 Scorpio. The moon goes into the Via Combusta every single month. It's not a big deal. But when the moon is in the Via Combusta, things happen sometimes that haven't been planned for. It doesn't necessarily mean they're bad, but if we've got a clear plan and the moon is in the Via Combusta, then events might take place which we really weren't expecting. And so when the moon is moving through the Via Combusta, we perhaps have to make a special attempt to be flexible, to have a standby plan just in case something happens out of the blue. And I would say that the moon goes into the Via Combusta New York time at approximately 6 or 7 a.m. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I haven't worked out precisely where it is. Around about 6 or 7 in the morning. If you're in New York, so that would be later. If you're in Europe, that would be late afternoon on Monday. If you're in Australia, New Zealand, then okay, that's going to be early on Tuesday. So it kind of depends where you are, but in general, the beginning of a week, the moon is moving through the Via Combusta, stays in the Via Combusta until sort of Wednesday, Thursday. So first half of a week, that's the time when it would be a good idea to be flexible. And of course, there are other things going on. And the most important event is a full moon. Now, I'm going to look at the full moon in detail just in a moment, but I just want to quickly go over the broad features of this full moon. When precisely is that full moon? Well, to be precise, that full moon is it's on Tuesday, and it is in the very early. Well, it's actually in the very early hours of the day, sort of. I think it's at 10 to 1 in the morning on Wednesday, or 11 minutes to 1 in the morning on Wednesday if you're in London. So it's sort of Tuesday, Wednesday. You've got this full moon, and as I said in the introduction, this full moon is at around 4 Scorpio, and that is not a great place for a full moon, because traditionally the moon has its degree of fall. Because remember, the moon has fallen in Scorpio. It's exalted in Taurus, so it's fallen in Scorpio. So that is the point of maximum fall. I mean, I know in Vedic astrology, which has a different zodiac, has this concept of maximum fall, because the closer you are to this point, the worse things get. And I quite like that idea. So this full moon could be about, in a general sense, about stuck emotions. There could be a little bit of vindictiveness and vengefulness and jealousy about this full moon because it's in Scorpio. And at the same time, something might be revealed to us. That's what full moons are about. We're in ignorance, then the full moon happens, and we see something for what it really is. Maybe we're going to see the darkness for what it really is. The evil gets uncovered. So that is a possible manifestation of this full moon. But there is a plus side to this full moon, and there might even be a bit of excitement about the full moon. But I will go into detail just in a moment. The other thing going on this week is that Mercury is stationary direct. So Mercury has been going retrograde for the last few weeks, and on Thursday it comes to a standstill. So just to tell you precisely when that happens, it happens on Thursday, the 25th, London time. That would be at 1:54 p.m. So about 5 to 2 in the afternoon on Thursday. So that would be sort of around 6. If you're in California, that would be 6 in the morning. If you're in Australia, New Zealand, it would be very early on Friday. But for most people, it will be sometime on Thursday that the Mercury goes stationary direct. And I think that many of us are going to breathe a sigh of relief. With Mercury going retrograde, there has been a certain amount of confusion. Things haven't perhaps gone the way we expected, and there may have been delay, and perhaps we felt it's been important to delay things. Though it does strike me that Mercury going retrograde does affect astrologers more than other people, or people into astrology, because we're very aware of Mercury retrograde and we're concerned about it. We've perhaps delayed things. We haven't wanted to do things while Mercury is retrograde. So for many of us, it's going to be a feeling that things are moving back to normal. And perhaps the two signs that are going to be most affected by Mercury going stationary direct are the signs ruled by Gemini, which of course are Gemini and Virgo. And Mercury also rules, it rules the seventh, also rules the opposite signs of Sagittarius and Pisces. So I think that the four signs that may get the biggest boost from Mercury going direct would be Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius and Pisces. But then you might also say, well, Aries as well, because Mercury is in Aries. So maybe I shouldn't be thinking about which signs benefit the most. I think all of us can benefit from Mercury going direct. So those are the two main things happening. And yes, there is stuff going on at the end of the week. The end of the week, Saturday, we have lots of little aspects. Mercury semi-sextile Mars, Mercury decile Uranus, Venus semi-sextile Neptune, Mercury semi-sextile Saturn. All of them are a little bit niggling. So by the weekend, you could argue, well, the main stuff is perhaps over, but lots of little things, which, I will cover on the day when I do my daily chart, when I do my daily forecast for next weekend. But for example, Mercury semi-sextile Mars, Venus semi-sextile Mars. So when if we look at how that's going to work, there is where's Venus? So Venus and Mars. You see, Venus is moving towards the semi-sextile with Mars, and it gets there over the weekend. So Venus semi-sextile Mars may say something about relationships. When you've got Venus is the planet of female sexuality, Mars is the planet of male sexuality. When they're in semi-sextile, they're in different signs, and so they do clash a little. Mars in Pisces doesn't really jive with Venus in Aries. So there may be a bit of tension when dealing with people on a one-to-one level, not just in a romantic sense. It's just two people trying to relate to each other in different ways, and somehow someone has to adapt. Otherwise, things may not work particularly well. But I don't want to go into those little aspects. I will be covering them over the weekend. Next weekend. But, I must emphasize that the main events are, from a geocentric perspective, the main events are full moon on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Mercury going stationary direct Thursday, Friday. We should not forget, though, the heliocentric situation. And the heliocentric situation at the beginning of a week is potentially quite serious. Let me show you what I mean. So if we go to the we look at the position of the planets from a heliocentric perspective. Remember, this is putting the sun in the center of the solar system where it should be. And we can see there's Mercury. Mercury's moving about 2 or 3 degrees a day from a heliocentric perspective. And so Monday, Tuesday, Mercury is making an opposition to Jupiter. It's also starting to make a square to Mars. So you can see that we have got a T-square forming. So a T-square is when you've got 2 planets in opposition, when you've got another planet making a square to that opposition. Though really this T-square involves 4 planets, because Mercury is opposition Jupiter and Uranus, and Mars is on the square. And so I think this T-square is high energy. And it could be a little violent from a global perspective. Remember, I do see heliocentric astrology as being about the collective, perhaps not so much about the individual. So when we look at what's going on in the world, there is a lot of excitement. There is perhaps a lot of violence. I know there's violence anyway. This is the point. There seems to be violence. Yeah, every single day we read about how violent the world is. And with what's going on in Ukraine, what's going on in the Middle East. It's not just Gaza, is it? I don't know what Israel and Iran are up to, but there is always stuff going on. We should not forget that. And in fact, I might have a quick look at Israel's chart just to remind ourselves about what's going on. But that is this heliocentric T-square, which we should not neglect when considering what's happening in the world. And I would think that maybe the beginning of the week, around the 23rd, 22nd, 23rd, even 24th, could be sort of high energy, and we should certainly watch the news. I should additionally point out that the full moon and Mercury going stationary direct do happen quite close to each other. And I've noticed that when Mercury goes stationary close to a lunation, there can be a big impact on sentiment, and this actually can affect the markets. Remember, this video is for entertainment only. I'm not making any stock market forecasts at all here, but Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, in fact probably the whole week, with the lunation impact, the lunation close to Mercury going stationary, that could impact the markets. So do consider that. But as I said, I must emphasize I'm not making any financial advice. I'm being as vague as I can, and this channel is for entertainment only. But just have a look. Doesn't always work. Maybe something will happen. But that is something we need to consider. And now I want to look at this full moon. I want to look at the full moon in detail. There we are. Okay, so this is the full moon. This is the full moon set for New York. You can see it's at 4 degrees 18 Scorpio. So let's not worry too much about where it's located at. Let's just look at the full moon in general. First thing, as I said, it's at 4 degrees Scorpio. That is going to be difficult, I think. It may not be particularly pleasant, and there could be a certain amount of vindictiveness, people not being straightforward about their feelings, keeping their feelings to themselves, and perhaps not having very nice feelings. And full moons are supposed to be about revealing things. And if the moon is in Scorpio, that's tough to reveal things. And when you do see the truth, if you can actually get to the truth, it may often not be particularly pleasant. At least that's if we look at the full moon in isolation. But we shouldn't look at the full moon in isolation. We need to see what else is happening at the same time as this full moon, because the full moon is really like a gateway. It's something opens. The power of the cosmos comes down here on Earth, and whatever's in that full moon chart tells us something about what could be happening down here. So we don't just look at the full moon. At the time of a full moon, there's a Mars-Neptune conjunction. Now, if you go back to the lunation, I think it was a lunation immediately before, I think it was Chernobyl, there was an exact Mars-Neptune conjunction. Now, that was an exact Mars-Neptune conjunction, and so that was representing sort of contamination, chemical, all the radiation spewing out over Europe. But this Mars-Neptune conjunction is not exact. It's over, nearly 4 degrees out. So that does limit how much damage it's going to cause. But I think there may be issues of contamination and chemicals being used in the wrong way with this full moon. And how long does the full moon last for? 2 weeks, perhaps 4 weeks. It's not an eclipse. So I don't think we want to over-dramatize it. And also at the time of the full moon is, of course, the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. And Jupiter-Uranus is about freedom, wanting freedom, demanding freedom even. And the full moon might be about a feeling that we've just had enough. We see the truth, and the old ways cannot go on like this. This is unacceptable. And we want to absolutely demand our freedom. And this feeds into potentially one positive aspect of this full moon. And this full moon relates to the fact that the full moon is on the Mercury-Jupiter and Mercury-Uranus midpoint. Let me just show you what I mean. So this chart is not really graphically working too well because it's getting all bunched up and the chart is beginning to distort. But there's Jupiter, there's Mercury, and the Sun and the Moon are on the direct midpoint. Likewise, there's Uranus and Mercury, so full moon is on the midpoint there. So let me just show you that in terms of a 90-degree dial to give you an idea about how that's working. Remember, 90-degree dial shows conjunctions, oppositions, and squares as all of them are counted as conjunctions, whereas semisquares and sesquiquadrates are counted as oppositions. So let's take the dial and look at the midpoint. Look at the symmetry of the full moon. So there's the full moon. Just sort of line of symmetry there, and there is Mercury. In fact, it's Mercury conjunct the North Node, and there's remember, Mercury is pretty close to the North Node, isn't it? And there's the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. And so you can see that the full moon is forming a symmetry. So the full moon actually brings together Mercury conjunct the North Node with Jupiter conjunct Uranus. And that's quite exciting, actually. And that might suggest that this full moon really is actually quite liberating. I know I've been very negative about it, but so far, but I think there is certainly a positive side to it. Um, it could be quite revolutionary with that. Ideas are going to be revolutionary, and there might actually be a sense of excitement about this full moon. We realize what actually is possible. Now, when I talk about what is possible, that doesn't mean it's going to happen. We'd have to make it happen. That's always the case with astrology, particularly when giving good news. Good news is, giving people good news is, or telling people that something good is going to happen in the future is always a problem, because there's a tendency to just hang around and just wait for it to happen. And 9 times out of 10, it doesn't happen. So if you want something to happen, you've got to be positive about this. You've got to be excited, and you've got to believe that your ideas really, really can happen. And perhaps that allows us to sort of break free from the negativity of the moon in Scorpio. Because, not just anywhere in Scorpio, remember. It's in early Scorpio, moon is in the Via Combusta, and it's very close to 3 degrees Scorpio, where the moon is at its point of maximum fall. So I think that could be pretty positive. It depends on our situation, though of course it may say something about what's going on in the world around us. And I think it really does bring together. The key point is it brings together Mercury conjunct the node with the Uranus conjunct Jupiter. So I think there's something to be optimistic about there. Then we have to consider the new moon, the full moon, from a relocated perspective. I just want to look at the astrocartography for the full moon. So, so here's the astrocartography for the full moon, and you see this yellow line here. This yellow line here is all the places on Earth where the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction is on a descendant. And you can see it goes through Peru, goes through, I don't know, Venezuela. So that's goes through Iceland. So those are a few places where the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction may be particularly strong. I don't know a great deal about Latin America, but we should certainly be looking at what's going on in Peru and Venezuela, and maybe there'll be a certain amount of restlessness there with that Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. Then we've got all the places that have the new moon on the descendant, and that goes through New York and Washington, D.C. I will be looking at that chart, I will be looking at the Washington, D.C. chart in isolation in a moment. And all the places that the new moon is on the descendant, Paris. So Paris and London may be affected by this full moon, and Jupiter and Uranus. Not Jupiter and Uranus. The new moon is conjunct. The new moon is opposition. Is conjunct the descendant in Paris and London. That might suggest enemies, and enemies of the two countries. Maybe that indicates, I don't know, who are Paris and London's main enemies. Well, from a government's perspective, that would be Russia. And finally, I can't ignore Poland. I think Poland does strike me as a country that could really be affected by this full moon. There's the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, and it is going right through Poland. And I'll be looking at the chart set for Warsaw. So let's go into those charts in a bit more detail. And here's the Washington D.C. Full moon. Did I say new moon? It's a full moon, not a new moon. Full moon. So here's the Washington D.C. full moon. So the full moon is at 4:18 Scorpio. If you set it for Washington D.C., the ascendant is at 4:14 Scorpio. And with the full moon on the ascendant descendant, as it's America, the United States, America is always concerned about its enemies. And I would think that America will be thinking very hard about its place in the world and about its enemies. And I suppose if this bill goes through Congress, sending $61 billion to Ukraine, of course it's not sending literally $61 billion to Ukraine. A lot of it is going to arms manufacturers and so forth, and Ukrainians won't actually see very much of it. But, it'll prolong the war, I suppose. Get a few more people killed, I suppose, yeah, that's what it's all about, isn't it? Won't change the outcome. But that full moon on the ascendant and the descendant is very much does focus on America's enemies. Events may be happening over the next few weeks which relate to America's place in the world and how it deals with countries it regards as its enemies. So I suppose in the first instance, you can see that this full moon is on the Mercury-Jupiter midpoint, Mercury-Uranus midpoint. So that is the excitement, perhaps, that it's a new direction, that America is standing up to its enemies. I mean, maybe that's how it's going to be perceived. But longer term, I don't think that is necessarily particularly fortunate. Another place to consider is Paris. So in Paris, the full moon, the moon is exactly on the midheaven. So in Paris, the moon is 4:18 Scorpio, and the midheaven is at 4:17 Scorpio. I think when I was looking at the astrocartography, I may have said the wrong thing. I may have. What did I say? I think I might have said the moon was on the IC. Well, the moon is on the midheaven in Paris, and that's about the government, power. Moon is in Scorpio. It's in a poor place in Scorpio. It's about government authority and how people perceive the government, and I don't think that's particularly good for government's authority. And people will more and more see the French government for what it really is, and so we need to look at what Macron is doing over the next few weeks. It's I don't think going to help Macron. I've already looked at Macron's chart. Macron's chart started his term when he became president. He has got overall a great chart, Macron, but at the moment Macron he's going through a really bad patch. His ability to make good decisions is pretty much zero. So Macron is a dangerous president. He can't see the wood for the trees. He's all over the place. And maybe with the moon exactly on the midheaven, opposite with full moon there, it's going to really emphasize this. We get a similar picture, actually, in London. We relocate it to Westminster. Westminster being a part of London associated with government. So we reset the full moon for Westminster. The moon is pretty close to the midheaven, not as close as it is in Paris, though. And, okay, we might expect something. Focus on the government, perhaps on the government's vindictiveness, but it's not going to be as strong, not going to be as strong as Paris. Finally, I want to consider Warsaw. This is the chart. This is the chart for Warsaw, and Warsaw has a midheaven at the exact time of a new moon. Sorry, the exact time of the full moon. The midheaven is at 23 Scorpio. So we have a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction on the IC here for Poland. So the concept of freedom is going to be important. And one thing I perhaps should have said about this full moon is it's not just the full moon that is. It's not just a full moon that is 4 degrees Scorpio. It's also square Pluto, and I kind of forgot to say that. It's a very Pluto full moon, and I think that Pluto does add to the malefic nature of this full moon. Now, it's about Pluto square the full moon is not exact, and it affects us all. We shouldn't forget this full moon is picked up by Pluto, and looking at Warsaw, we can see that at the time of this full moon, Jupiter-Uranus conjunction is right on the IC, and that may be about rebellion. We've already got a bit of rebellion in Warsaw, haven't we? Because in Poland, because the farmers are protesting against cheap imports from Ukraine. I think primarily cheap grain imports from Ukraine, and farmers are blocking the border. Of course, the government in Poland wants to really support Ukraine, come what may. And I think we should really be looking at what's happening in Poland, not least because this full moon does impact the horoscope of Donald Tusk, who is the Prime Minister of Poland. And I'll be looking at Donald Tusk's chart very soon. One other place to consider is Hawaii. I didn't actually set up a chart for Hawaii, but if you do an astrocartography for this doesn't even come out. There is that Mars-Neptune opposition is somewhat close to Hawaii. In fact, I need to. Yeah, let's see what I mean. Here it is. Here is the. The Mars-Neptune conjunction isn't anywhere close, but this is the chart of Hawaii, and if you set this full moon for Hawaii, the midheaven is 25 Taurus, and the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction is at 22 Taurus. So the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction is fairly close to the midheaven in Hawaii, and at the same time, looking at Hawaii's natal chart, this is a chart of when Hawaii became a state. So when Hawaii became a state, Neptune was at 4 degrees 32 Scorpio. So this full moon is right on Hawaii's Neptune. Now, this may relate to weather phenomena, I suppose storms, all that kind of stuff. You think of Neptune and the sea. And so the full moon is hitting Hawaii's Neptune, and at the same time, Jupiter-Uranus is on Hawaii's midheaven. So that is certainly a place to consider, but it's a bit obscure because you don't really regard big global events as affecting Hawaii. I suppose we could have another Pearl Harbor, but we're not going to have another Pearl Harbor, are we? Other people to consider, aside from Hawaii, there is Bill Gates. Bill Gates keeps coming up. I always sort of say, oh, well, his Bill Gates chart is being hit, and of course nothing happens. But Bill Gates, Bill Gates's sun is at 5.2 Scorpio. He has got Uranus square his sun, and this full moon is right on his sun, and it's squaring his Uranus. And remember, this full moon is square Pluto. So this full moon's square Pluto does impact Bill Gates and perhaps how he expresses himself and what else is going on in his life. And I'm sure you've got something to say about it. I understand that a lot of people watching this video don't have a particularly good impression of Bill Gates. So I would invite you to consider this full moon and how it might impact him. And we have got someone who must be experiencing something, because Donald Trump has just had we just had jury selection, so Donald Trump's trial for his business filing relating to Stormy Daniels. Remember Stormy Daniels? I talked to her about her a few days ago. Trump slept with her in July 2006, and then he attempted to buy her silence with this check for $130,000, which was, went through Michael Cohen, I think. And how did it work? It was filed as a business expense. Of course, it wasn't a business expense. It was a personal expense, and that's what the whole issue is about. And looking at Stormy Daniels' chart, Stormy Daniels has her moon at 4.56 Scorpio, and it's opposition Chiron. Remember moon opposition Chiron? I was talking about Hitler yesterday. He had moon opposition Chiron. Moon opposition Chiron, something about the mother, isn't it? Isn't that how it works? I mean, when I was looking at Hitler, I was really linking it with his relationship with his mother and how he was impacted by his mother's death in December 1907. Looking at Stormy Daniels, we know she must be under some pressure with this trial. She's in the news again. And it may be tough for her, though we should not forget that this new moon, this full moon, is on the Mercury-Jupiter and Mercury-Uranus midpoints. So there might be a silver lining for her, but I would have thought that Stormy Daniels is emotionally under pressure, but that's what we would expect. And the moon is the public. And so moon in Scorpio, you could say moon in Scorpio in the public. If you've got moon in Scorpio up there, perhaps that's the horoscope of a successful porn star. So maybe she can benefit from it. Maybe she's used moon in Scorpio in the past quite well, quite effectively. Because Stormy Daniels' moon, as I described, is not actually that badly placed, although it's, in one sense, it's not badly placed, because the moon is a nocturnal planet, and so she was born at night, and it's a feminine planet, and it's in a feminine sign, and it's above the horizon. And so in terms of sects, sects, planetary sects, not as well as perhaps sex, sex and sex, that moon has been quite successful for her. And maybe this full moon on her moon may not be quite as bad as it looks. David Cameron, Lord Cameron, British Foreign Secretary, he has his Mercury at 4 Scorpio, and he has his moon at 6 Leo, and he's got Jupiter at 1 Leo. So David Cameron, back from the dead, British Foreign Minister, Foreign Secretary, neocon, doing his best to stir things up, to keep the war going in Ukraine. This full moon impacts him. It's on his Mercury. And also we've got Pluto is going to be opposition his Jupiter, possibly on his Moon-Jupiter midpoint. So he's going to be very activated, and he's going to have to deal with the truth of the matter. Maybe he's going to start to see the truth of the matter about what is going on in Ukraine if he doesn't already see it. Maybe there's a sense of understanding for him, which could be quite tough. But with the moon on the Mercury-Jupiter and Mercury-Uranus midpoint, that might give him some kind of insane optimism to think that he can carry on with this war. And then there is Donald Tusk. Donald Tusk is the Prime Minister of Poland. So remember, there's a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction at the time of this full moon, and this Jupiter-Uranus conjunction is on the IC. If you set the chart for Warsaw, and Donald Tusk has his, if this time is right, Donald Tusk has his midheaven at 5:59 Scorpio. He's got Venus at 3 Taurus. He has got his Sun at 1 Taurus. So midheaven, Sun, Venus sort of all together, and he's got his Moon at 1 Aquarius. So this full moon, and he's got Neptune at 1 Scorpio. So Pluto and the full moon are completely smashing into his chart. I mean, it's been happening for some time, but having the full moon on his midheaven, opposition his Venus, it's a big deal. And I would have said that Donald Tusk is going to be under a huge amount of pressure now with this full moon. And I assume that relates to how he deals with the farmers' protests. Clearly, Poland is becoming an increasingly divided society. People are concerned not just about the Ukrainian imports. I think because the European Union has removed duty on Ukrainian imports, and that's affecting Ukrainian farmers. And this is not good. There's a lot for him to deal with, and I think that the full moon is going to put his premiership under a huge amount of pressure. And finally, my own chart. I know I'm not really a famous person. I shouldn't really be talking about myself. This is my chart. And you can see that I have an ascendant at 454 Taurus. I should tell you that I always thought that my ascendant was at 2 degrees 27 Taurus, because I thought that I was born at 3:30 in the morning in Red Hill in Surrey on May the 30th, 1962. And that's what I always thought. And then my mother died in 2017, and sometime afterwards I was sent, my sister sent me this package of little bits of paper that and documentation. Got this envelope through the post, and I opened this envelope, and in there was the tag from the East Surrey Hospital where I was born. And there it was. It had my birth time on it, all the way back from, then 2017, over 55 years before. I got it, and I wasn't born at 3:30 p.m. It was totally devastating to realise. I've gone through all my time as an astrologer thinking I was born at 3:30 in the morning. In fact, I was born at 3:35 in the morning. And so my ascendant suddenly changed. My whole conception of myself had to change. My ascendant moved from 227 Taurus to 454 Taurus. And that's important because suddenly my Mercury, which is at 1953, suddenly my Mercury was exactly semi-square my ascendant. That's important. I've got, it really does link Mercury and my ascendant. And I have a full moon on my ascendant. there's there's on my descendant. The moon is going to be right on my descendant, and it's going to be on my ascendant. So this full moon for myself, is just how I look at it. To be honest, when I look at events going on in my life, the astrology, I'm a bit jaded on it because I just been so focused on what's going on in my life astrologically, but I probably don't look at it as much as I perhaps used to. But this full moon, my first instinct, my first look at that is concern. I mean, my enemies, moon on my seventh house, that could be my enemies. It could be my health. The moon is across my ascendant. So, if I drop dead over the next few weeks, you suddenly stop seeing these YouTube videos. You'll know what happened. It was the full moon that got me. That is one way of looking at it. But with astrology, it's so easy to be kind of over frightened. And I often find that if you actually notice something before it happens, it kind of disempowers it. So the fact that I'm talking about the full moon across my ascendant, descendant maybe indicates that it's not going to be as bad as I thought. And another thing about this full moon is that it may be good because it's on the Mercury Jupiter and Mercury Uranus midpoint. So yes, there could be news. It could be bad news. There could be bad news coming my way. But on the other hand, Mercury Jupiter, Mercury Uranus, maybe it's something exciting. And another way of looking at this chart is to say, well, what happened the last time the full moon happened? At 4 degrees Scorpio. Always do this by the way, if you see a new or a full moon hitting something in your chart, go back 19 years because you'll get the same, a new moon, full moon at the same degree 19 years earlier. So if I remember, what was happening to me, I don't know, 19 years ago. So I go back 19 years. This is the full moon, April the 24th, 2005, 19 years ago. There it is. 4 degrees 20 Scorpio. I remember where I was. I was in Bratislava. I was in Slovakia. What was May 2005 like for me? It was great. It was a good month. I think I was happy. We moved from one apartment to another in Bratislava, but it was an amicable movement. It wasn't. The landlord said he was doing work and we needed to go somewhere else, so we found another apartment. It was fine. It was so. That's always a good thing to do if you're worried about a new or a full moon, or indeed any event. Always look back to see what was happening the last time it did happen. And with new and full moons, you can just go back 19 years because you will find the exact same degree. And there you can see, and it wasn't a problem. But this full moon did not have, it wasn't on the Mercury Jupiter and Mercury Uranus midpoint. And I think Mercury Jupiter, Mercury Uranus midpoint this time round, maybe this full moon is perhaps a bit more fortunate than it was 19 years ago, but 19 years ago didn't seem to be too much of a problem. Sorry to talk about me. But try to generalize it about how you might want to look at your own chart and events going on in your life. Okay, so that's the astrology, and I just want to finish off by looking at the I Ching. And I suppose with the I Ching, it's not suppose, I'm telling you with the I Ching, it's voluntary. If you don't want me to do your I Ching, then you don't have to watch. you can just stop looking at this video. I won't be offended. You can look at something else, because this I Ching reading only applies to people who are watching the I Ching segment of this video. Okay, let's start off then. I asked the question, what is this week going to be like for those watching the I Ching segment of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 46, which is pushing upwards. And this is a general reading. Remember, I'm going to look at money, career, and relationships. But generally speaking, 46 is pushing upwards. And on the surface, it's quite positive. We are making progress. Things are happening. We may not be actually reaching our goal, but we're certainly getting there. And we have two moving lines. The third line moves and the fifth line moves. So when the third line moves, well, we have to remember that in the I Ching, the third line from the bottom is often unfortunate. And what the I Ching talks about here is pushing upwards into an empty city. It's like we're making progress, and it's really easy. It's just too easy this week. So we might find that this week, it is easy. It's just too easy. And when we get our result, we break up into the daylight, and we find we haven't moved. The imagery I kind of like is, in the Second World War, people were trying to dig out of prisoner of war camps, and they dig these tunnels. And the whole idea is that you're supposed to dig your tunnel under the perimeter fence and come out the other side. But it's like digging a tunnel, and you come out and you realize that you spent all this time digging this tunnel, and you come up, you're still in the prisoner of war camp. So it's like that. So if you find at the beginning of a week that something is really easy, then watch out, because it might mean that actually you're achieving nothing. Then the fifth line moves. Fifth line is more fortunate. It's about making progress. It's about getting recognition. But when we make progress, we have to do it using the correct form, especially if other people are involved. What we look like, ceremony, going through the motions, that's going to be important. But we are definitely making progress. So that's perhaps the beginning of a week, pushing upwards, perhaps having a false start, but then working out what we need to do, making progress, and then this hexagram transitions to hexagram 29. Hexagram 29 is the abysmal. It's about a hole, the pits. And we move into a situation that could be dangerous. And it's a kind of danger that we've seen before. So it's not an inevitable danger. It's not inevitable that we're going to fall into the pit, but we could. But because we understand the danger, we can tread carefully. And if we just go with the flow, then we should be okay. But we're not really going to be making much progress anymore. There's a limit to the progress we can make, because our main effort should be focusing on making sure that we keep what we've got, that we survive. We're not really looking to gain new ground here. We're just trying to keep things on a level keel, and not make sure we don't drop things. So whatever gains we make by the beginning of a week, by the middle of a week, by the end of a week, we're going to have to tread really very carefully here. So that's a general picture. Now, looking at this from the perspective of money, I think there is a possibility of false optimism, perhaps, at the beginning of a week in terms of money. You might think that things have changed and that things are going your way and you're making progress towards perhaps negotiating with someone or getting money out of someone. It might feel that it's all going well, and you might put a lot of energy into getting the money you're looking for. And at a certain point, you might realize that it was all for nothing, pushing upwards into an empty city. But don't panic. It's all about how you conduct yourself. So if there's money that you're looking for, the form matters. How do you request money? How do you ask money? How do you ask someone to pay you money they owe you? How do you work out how to ask for a pay rise? Form matters. The ceremony matters. And if you get the form right, then by the middle of a week, it may feel that you're actually starting to make a bit of progress. So perhaps in a way, from a financial perspective, there's a bit of trial and error here, working out how best to engage with the world in terms of asking for money and getting the world to give you what you feel you deserve. And then 46, it does transition to the abysmal, and there's a suggestion here at the end of a week. From a financial perspective, the week could end up being a little dangerous. There are many ways in which you can lose money, in which you can spend money on stuff that's garbage, you can make financial mistakes. This could all happen. But you've been here before. You've probably lost money like this before. You've overspent like this before. You've been careless like this before. This is a danger you're very familiar with. And so I do think that if you are completely aware, then you can sidestep the danger and you'll know what to do and you'll know how to get round it. Looking at the I Ching from a career perspective, then at the beginning of a week, there is a feeling that we're making good progress, and possibly we're helped by the fact that Mercury is starting to go stationary direct. With Mercury going retrograde, for many of us, a lot of things have been on hold. And so we're pushing upwards. We're thinking, that things are finally starting to move, even before Mercury goes stationary direct. But we shouldn't be impressed by fast progress right at the beginning of a week. We might think we've really got it. We know where we're going. People are giving us recognition, and people are watching. People really observe what we're doing, and it's looking good. And perhaps if we're looking for a job, and we're applying for a job, it might feel that things are really working out. We're really confident that it's all going to happen, and we're going to get the recognition we deserve. But again, pushing upwards into an empty city, there is a danger that we waste a lot of energy trying to get something at work, and really it just doesn't happen. So we must be ready for that, and I think we mustn't be complacent, and we have to recognize that if we want something to happen, like whether it's getting a job or getting business or getting a promotion, there are really no shortcuts here. We're expected to go through the normal channels and in a very sort of systematic way. But the I Ching does say, with the fifth line does move. We're talking about the fifth line. It talks about going up some stairs, and that means rising. Perhaps getting promotion, or if not promotion, then getting more recognition. But it's a question of how we go up the stairs. And we go up the stairs with due ceremony. In other words, things have to be done correctly. We might feel it's a waste of time, but we have to do it correctly because that's what employers want. Or if we are self-employed and we're looking for new business, it's about behaving correctly towards a potential client. We've got to go through the process and, yes, behave correctly. I think that is going to be very important. And as the week progresses, 46 transitions to 29, which is the abysmal. So in our work, things could start becoming more complicated, even dangerous. We can see the pitfalls. Things could go wrong. There's big possibilities of making mistakes. But I think we're going to understand the dangers. If we just keep our eyes open, we will understand the dangers. And that's what the abysmal is about, from a constructive perspective. And perhaps we can use it to our advantage. It's not perhaps just us that's got the problem. It's also everyone around us, people in society, people we're working with. They're all skating around some danger. And maybe we can offer some advice. And by advising people of future dangers, we can really boost our credibility. And so it's perhaps a good time to be warning people about something. This may not be what they want to hear, but if we give people, whether they're, employers, clients, whoever they are, if we can warn them about something that might be about to happen or something that needs to be done better, okay, in the first instance, that warning might not go down well, but I think in the end, our caution will be recognized. And finally, looking at things from a perspective of relationships, all kinds of relationships, doesn't matter whether it's romantic, business, friendship, whatever. We get pushing upwards. This indicates that if relationships are important to us this week, at the beginning of a week maybe, it may feel that things are really happening. Things are starting to work. People are responding to us very well. And we're becoming popular. Our popularity ratings are going up, and it seems that we're in the process of making new connections. Existing relationships may be getting stronger. We may, if there have been recent disagreements, we seem to be getting over them. But in the first instance, we may find that a lot of our efforts come to nothing. I mean, pushing upwards into an empty city. Now, if we're, for example, meeting someone we've never met before and we're trying to cultivate their friendship or a relationship with them, it goes very well. But maybe at a certain point, we start to realize who we're dealing with. Remember, there's a full moon this week, and a full moon tells us the truth. It reveals things for what they are. And so if we're talking about new relationships, I'm not talking about long-term relationships. These are far more long-term relationships are resilient, and they can handle the odd full moon and the odd difficult line in a hexagram. But shorter-term relationships, we might suddenly have a realization that the other person is pretty vacant. There's not much there. We thought this person was someone we wanted to know, and when we start to realize who they are, we realize this is just not someone we really want to be around. Not because they're bad. It's just nothing there. At least from our perspective, there's nothing there. It's nothing. It's not a person we necessarily want to spend time with. So, especially with new relationships or relationships which actually start right now, if you put a lot of energy into it, you might suddenly realize that, this person is not someone you want to waste any more time with. That is a possibility. On the other hand, if you're trying to work on an existing relationship, it still could be quite difficult. You may think you're making progress, and then suddenly there's no progress at all. You realize that all your efforts to cultivate someone come to nothing. So if you're in that kind of situation where you're trying to cultivate a relationship, at first it might not work. Your efforts might be for nothing. But the fifth line moves as well, and this is a reminder that form matters. There are ways to get close to someone. There are ways to get over recent conflicts, or if there's someone new you want to form a relationship with. There are always ways of doing it, and you have to adopt the right way. And remember, it's all about ceremony. Yes, you can make progress, but the ceremony and the form is going to really matter. And in the end, once you get the form right, I think you can make progress. But this is particularly the case with people that you have to go through the process of realizing that there's nothing there, that some people have got nothing to offer. And it may be that some relationships stop at that hexagram pushing up, into that line in the hexagram pushing upwards into an empty city. You just realize that there's nothing there, and that's the end of it. But if you go beyond that third line and you move to the fifth line, then you can really strengthen the relationship, or indeed develop a new relationship, provided the form is correct. Then we move to the next hexagram, which is hexagram 29, which is the abysmal. And the abysmal is a difficult hexagram, and I think by the end of the week you may realize that some of the important relationships you're in are perhaps a little unstable. It's easy to fall out with someone. It's easy to have cultivated a good relationship with someone, but then to lose it very quickly. But it's perhaps about being aware of what can go wrong. That's what the abysmal is about. It's about awareness, and you need to use your knowledge of psychology. If you understand the other person, you'll know what upsets them. You'll know what could disrupt the relationship. And so, yeah, you're walking on eggshells a little bit. But I think you can walk on eggshells. It's okay. If it's a relationship you want to continue with and you want to cultivate, of course it may be a relationship you've decided that there really is nothing there, but if you want to cultivate this relationship, you are going to be, to an extent, walking on eggshells and just treading very carefully so that you don't fall into the pit. But I think it's very much something that is in your control. And that's what I've got to say about the I Ching. And I want to finally look back at the main event of the day. The main event of the week. And I just want to consider the full moon one more time, because it really is quite an important full moon, even though it's not an eclipse, it's not conjunct the nodes. And simply because I think one thing I did do when I described it earlier in this video, I underestimated the importance of Pluto. I sort of forgot to mention Pluto. And just a reminder that this full moon is square Pluto. And I think that does make it quite an intense full moon. And it may feel that something really has to give. Remember, it's in fixed signs. Moon in Scorpio, opposition Sun in Taurus, square Pluto in Aquarius. And I think a lot of people are going to feel under pressure, under a lot of pressure. It's not just going to be Donald Tusk, the Prime Minister of Poland. It will feel that just something has to give, and that might be reflected in the world around us and how people are responding to this full moon. And I think perhaps we have a little bit of a choice. We can dwell with this full moon on that Pluto, and it can just become really overwhelming. Nothing gives, there's no compromise. Alternatively, we can dwell on the fact that this full moon is on the Mercury-Jupiter and Mercury-Uranus midpoints. And that will perhaps help us sort of get away from the negative side of Pluto. But I just really want to emphasize the fact that it's a Pluto full moon. And I know some people like to make an association with Scorpio and Pluto. I do not accept that Pluto rules Scorpio. In the same way, I'm a traditionalist. I do not accept that Uranus rules Aquarius. I know I've had 2 comments recently over the last, when I talked about Saturn ruling Aquarius, people said, no, it's Uranus. Someone said, it's Uranus that rules Aquarius. I suppose I have to say, I don't want to be dogmatic. It's not about right and wrong. We have different ways of looking at it, but Saturn has ruled Aquarius for thousands of years, and I don't think it needs to change just because we have discovered this new planet just a couple of centuries back. But going back to Pluto, it sort of has an association with Scorpio. It doesn't rule Scorpio, but there's an association with Scorpio. And with Pluto square Moon in Scorpio and Pluto square the Sun, it is quite an intense full moon. When people are going to really sort of go into themselves. Some people might just find it really difficult to express themselves, and a lot of power is going to be building up under the surface, and that might be the power of resentment, even the power of hatred. And I think in a global sense that matters. And how do you resolve that? Well, I think you try and resolve it through Jupiter and Uranus, remembering that this full moon is on the Mercury-Jupiter and Mercury-Uranus midpoint. You can't keep it to yourself forever, because if you keep it to yourself, these feelings of resentment, they will turn into hatred. They will turn into something really nasty. And this full moon is perhaps saying it's got the energy at some stage has to be released. And perhaps the sooner it's released, the better. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much for listening to me. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, I would of course be grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed and you enjoyed the video, I'd be really, really grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. Thanks very much for listening, and I will talk to you again very soon.